Welcome to the Draft Deeper podcast. This is your host, Nathan Grubel. Joining me as always is my producer, Kevin Black. And I'm doing a little bit of double duty this week. One of two special guests that I'm recording with tonight. You'll find both of these episodes in your podcast feeds a little bit later on in the week here. But my first guest that I'm recording with tonight on June 8th, you know him as an Emmy winner. You know him as the founder of Knicks Blog. You know him as an SNY contributor. Listen, if you follow the New York Knicks, you know exactly who I'm talking to tonight. Already did No Ceilings a favor and gave Corey and Albert over on the Draft Act one hell of a show a few months ago. Now I get to have him on my podcast. I'm so excited to be talking to Tommy D tonight. Tommy, what's going on, brother?
Nathan, Kevin, great to be with you. Very kind of you to say. It feels like a lifetime ago that I, was really focusing and doing a ton on the Knicks, but because of Twitter, and social media, of course, it sort of stuck with me, which is great. So really excited. Love what you're doing with No Ceilings and Draft Deeper, and like you said, Albert and Corey, we had a really good chat. Looking forward to this one for sure. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So we're going to do a little bit of light Knicks talk. Really, the main reason why I wanted to have Tommy on was he's going to give some tremendous insight into a draft prospect who's been divisive, I think, a little bit in the scouting community, to say the least. That would be Aj Griffin. So this will be definitely a follow-up to the Draft Act podcast episode that I mentioned. And then we'll finish things off. Maybe we'll do a little bit of light top 5 conversation. We'll see where this podcast takes us. But Tommy, just really quickly for my audience, for whatever reason, in case they aren't big Knicks fans, they didn't follow some of your previous work as to where you are now, why don't you just give a little bit of your background and your story working in basketball and doing some of the things that you do?
Oh, absolutely. Day to day, normal job is in this whole digital world and strategy and working with businesses to sort of optimize their approach. But what I've been able to do through not only digital, but also some television work and work with the NBA and certainly with SNY, just been able to connect with some great people around the NBA, now sort of into Europe as well. Started Modern NBA, which sort of my own foray into sort of a middle of the road analytics meets sort of a professionally trained scouting eye. I learned under the NBA's director of scouting, Ryan Blake. Did some stuff for the NBA for 10 years and started working on this whole kind of side project and building out some really cool stuff, and it's started to catch some real momentum here, and it's really exciting because I just love the game. Going back to when I played in high school, had a chance to play in college, but ended up playing another sport. Got back into coaching, and sort of learned pretty quickly that I wanted to sort of go down a different path, which got me into media, and then I realized I wanted to go into definitely a different path, which is where I got into scouting and evaluating, and now consulting and helping out front offices, with some decision making and things like that. So it's been a great ride, and I'm just getting started, I feel like. So it's really exciting.
Well, scouting's our jam over here in No Ceilings, and especially the Draft Deeper podcast. So you're welcome at home, my friend, and that's why I'm so excited to have you on. So I mentioned we touch very lightly on some New York Knicks stuff. I've been trying to cover some of the lottery teams on the Draft Deeper podcast feed over the last few weeks. Tommy, I know that you at the very least, you follow the Knicks situation and what's going on. What are some of your big picture takeaways on where the Knicks are at right now, and where do you think they could kind of look to target in the draft with the 11th pick?
Yeah, for sure. So the first piece to that is, coming off what I think a lot of people will recognize as a surprise season, the 4th seed, making the playoffs, playing what I thought was really solid and strong, sort of more modern offense under Tom Thibodeau, which a lot of people had questions sort of coming in. Obviously, it was a different type of year with pandemic and no fans and all that. So, this year I think teams in the conference got better. I don't think the Knicks, from a roster perspective, did. Obviously, Walker, that didn't work out. They they lost Alfred Payton. A lot of people couldn't wait to get him to the airport. But that point guard situation, did not fix itself after that decision. And to me, they relied so much on Derrick Rose. And when you talk about sort of risk mitigation and things like that, when you're so dependent on a player who's had so many injuries, it's very difficult to to have consistent success, because that player is not always going to be in the lineup, of course. And then you're leaning on Julius Randle, who, in my opinion, just watching that, I went to a game very early on in the season. It was against the Raptors, a really feisty, long, versatile Raptors team that did their homework on Randle. And I feel like that was the game. Nick Nurse, obviously, and his staff do a tremendous job. I felt like that was the game where the league sort of took a snapshot or that scouting tape of what Julius Randle's weaknesses were, and sort of got spread around, and became a copycat league on how to defend him. And he really struggled throughout the course of this year. And that to me is not the worst sign in the world. His contract is not atrocious. He is tradable. I've talked to some teams around the league that have interest in him. So, there is a possibility, that they can probably move on from Randle if they'd like. The question then becomes sort of, who's your centerpiece? And if it's me, if you have the time, and maybe you bought another year based off of last year, I don't know if this is true, but you may be able to make the case that you'd really like to build around RJ Barrett. I would. Yep. I would continue to have him be the primary facilitator. I think they talk a lot about lack of point guards, but I think complementary guards who can really live off of what he does in terms of getting into the lane whenever he wants, in terms of getting his shot off whenever he wants. He's 21 years old. He defends 3, sometimes 4 positions. He can knock down the shot now. I think he's a star. I think he's, what Jason Tatum, maybe not as good as Tatum, but I think he has that type of trajectory where in a year or 2 years, as they start to enter the playoffs more and more, people are going to say, is he ready to take that all NBA leap? So I would continue to support whatever he's doing, whatever he's about, because it's certainly working out for Boston right now.
Certainly has always been talked about as an incredibly hard worker, both on and off the court. RJ Barrett at one time was the projected number 1 pick coming into that draft before the whole Zion Williamson explosion started. Certainly one of Canada's brightest young basketball stars. And I would agree with you. I think RJ still has plenty more to tap into in terms of potential. And I think you really have to, the only way you're going to find out what exactly he still has in terms of potential is continuing to build around him, putting the ball in his hands and letting him be the primary de facto decision maker, because he's kind of been in a weird spot with this Knicks team over the last few years where he's had the ball in his hands, or he's gotten more opportunities to have the ball in his hands, but it hasn't really been like quote unquote his role, right? Like, you still kind of been like an off-ball player, and that's not taking to a lot of the strengths that he brings to the table as one of these bigger wing initiators. So I would agree with you 100%. I want to see how they continue to build around him and what that looks like. Is Emmanuel quickly in more of the fold as one of the guards next to RJ Barrett? Does Deuce McBride continue to grow in his role and get some minutes? Is there another answer at the guard spot that the Knicks could go to in this draft, or another bigger wing next to RJ Barrett? Is that where they go in this draft? I know for certain, I think a lot of Knicks fans, yourself included, Tommy, would be incredibly happy if one Aj Griffin fell to the New York Knicks at number 11. And that's really the centerpiece, and what the bulk of we wanted to talk about tonight was Mr. Aj Griffin. And you have a backstory in watching AJ play personally and kind of seeing some of his development along the way from high school until now, Tommy. So why don't you enlighten the audience about the experience you have in evaluating AJ Griffin and kind of where you're at on his game right now, break some things down a little bit.
Yeah, I do. Thank you. The background there is he played along with R.J. Davis and a couple of other names that you'll probably hear over the next couple of years. Boogie Fland being one, who's a great prospect, point guard prospect who's a junior. Talking about Archbishop Stepinac High School in White Plains. Head coach Pat Massaroni, who's a very, very good friend of mine. Just a great program, nationally ranked program now, and Danny Carbuccia is another guard who's a sophomore. They've talked about that group as the best backcourt combo since Khalid Reeves and Derek Phelps at Christ the King a long time ago, mainly because they didn't put AJ in the backcourt when he played with RJ. But I can say this about AJ rather. Incredible human, incredible young man, great family, hard worker, just the thirst and the want to be great is there. Probably a top five. I don't say probably. I would say without question a top 5 pick when he was 15. If I were general manager, I would at any NBA team, I would have tried to change the rules so that I could draft him at 15. He would at 15 years old, not slot 15. He was 6'6", 215, 220, not an ounce of fat. Incredibly gifted all around, and probably the 4th option on that team. That team had 4 Division I players, and they ended up winning the New York State Federation Championship for the first time in a very, very long time. And to me, as he's evolved, and he did so this year at Duke, being that 3rd or 4th option suits him really, really well. And when you need him to sort of step forward and do a little bit more, he can. But I just love the fact that he doesn't need the basketball to make winning plays for your team. He's the perfect pair with every player that you have. He's played with a sort of a high volume guard in RJ in high school, and when he was not in the lineup, they struggled to win games. They played a very competitive schedule. When he was in the lineup, they won, and that tells me about impact for sure. I think this year at Duke, what you saw was sort of an older offense in terms of scheme. A lot of Paolo mid-post, a lot of, sort of short corner, Williams, and not optimal space. So, he sort of had to try to find his own. He can stretch you out from length to 35 feet without question. We've seen his 3-point shooting ability, but he is a driver when there's space. And I don't think there was optimal space in this Duke lineup this year, and they still, managed to make it to the Final Four. So, and he did log a lot of minutes, and as a freshman, a lot were lumped on their shoulders. Coach K's last year certainly had an impact. But I think whatever team gets AJ is going to get a player who's going to be in the league for a very long time, and every single player that plays with him is going to love playing with him, because he's a complimentary guy with dominant skills if he needs to be. So if he's in the right situation and you don't have to worry about him, saying bust, you let him settle in. He's not even 19. So you let him settle in, and you're talking 4 or 5 years from now, I think this guy is the absolute limit, and whatever team he's on is going to be successful. I have no doubt about that.
Before we touch on some of my evaluation of AJ's game, I want to ask you, and I think you're going to bring great clarity to the question I'm about to ask you, Tommy. And you even referenced COVID when you were talking about the Knicks, but let alone the fact that also has played a part in the development of young basketball players over the last few years. We also have to take into account that AJ suffered multiple injuries in high school, and when you aren't on the court playing the game and being able to develop that way. It's really hard at certain points to be a freshman in college at a high major program, and all of a sudden you're sort of in a position where you might feel a little bit of pressure to play catch up in terms of your understanding and your processing of what's actually going on both ends of the court. And he even alluded to some of that when he sat down and did his video breakdown interview with Mike Schmitz. He talked about some of that as well. But is it a little unfair that AJ has dropped down in certain circles when you take into account, A, the fact that he is one of the youngest players in this draft, but also the fact that he hasn't had the same developmental time as some of these other guys? And you look at it like, yeah, he might be behind in certain areas right now, but because of what he went through and because he can still continue to grow once he gets to the NBA, that we might look back like 2 years from now and we're just like, holy smokes, all he really needed was more time. The talent was always there. A lot of people overthought this.
Yeah, and I think by nature, and just in terms of how much content is out there and how much content needs to be put out there. And by the way, not anyone close has, in my opinion, the quality overall as you guys do. I mean that sincerely. It's very easy to, I think it's very easy to try to get shock value and, put a lot of stuff out there that, may not have the right context. You guys do an amazing job. So I think there is the unfair piece, to answer your question, is that you have to look for something apparently to be critical of. And people who are looking back to his high school days and talking about injuries doesn't really, I don't think it's fair. If your kid was 15 years old and he was a surefire lottery pick and he had to wait 3 years, you'd probably put him in bubble wrap, right? Like you would probably tell him he couldn't leave the house. So, we're talking about tens of millions of dollars. Yep. So, I think people who talk about other people for a living don't always put that into perspective properly. Yep. These are people. These are not just prospects. So, and they have families and they have a future. And, when people say, "Oh, I don't see AJ's lift anymore, and I don't see his, his base is way wide on his 3-point shot," and I think it's just being, finding, critiques for the sake of critique. It's why he is, perhaps not going number one. But if he's in between, in my mind, 3 and 10, then, when you factor in positions and needs, you've got Smith and you've got Holmgren, you've got Paolo, you've got Ivy. I think Keegan Murray is extraordinary. I think he's going to be a star. Matherin is terrific. Daniels. I think he's right in a good spot.
Yep.
With being mentioned with all those guys. The problem is, I think AJ's positionless. Obviously, I don't think he can play center. I think he can guard some centers. I think he can do what Draymond does sometimes. But I think I think he's just so good as a connector, which is a buzz term that a lot of people talk about. But in the league, it's the guy who doesn't have the ball stick to him that can move the ball from right to left, and just be a really, a piece that sort of bridges the gap between the bigs and the smalls. He is that type. And I think he's as good as anybody as I've seen at it since I've been doing this. And it's not just because I've seen him, and it's not just because I think he's a great kid and young man. I truly believe that, he just has this ability to make everybody around him better, and he doesn't need to dominate the ball, which is just an incredible quality.
So the defense notwithstanding, we can certainly touch on the offense first because it's obviously the most important part of the sell on Aj Griffin as a prospect. I like that you defined him as a connector because from what I've seen on tape, from what the numbers would bear out, I don't know how much of a quote-unquote creator he is for others, but in terms of somebody who can keep the ball moving and make the right play once he gets the ball in his hands, a very good one decision maker. If he's getting the ball with an easy opportunity to catch and shoot or catch and drive, generally something good's going to happen when he's in those situations, right? And the numbers would certainly bear that out. I mean, I could read you all the different synergy percentiles in terms of how high he ranks in certain play types. Finished the year in the 98th percentile in terms of total offense, which is ridiculous when you factor
Mm-hmm.
in where he started the year, right? He wasn't part of the
Mm-hmm.
starting lineup. He was still working his way back in, coming off the bench. Then he became a starter and ended up in multiple big games Duke's most efficient offensive player, which is really, Tommy, that's
Yep.
I struggle wrapping my head around his evaluation at times because there are moments where, like I said, as soon as he gets the ball in his hands, he'll go to one of those catch and rip drives and he'll be able to stop in the paint, turn and pop himself up, and he hits one of these incredible jump shots where he just seems like he's floating in the air for forever. And my God, man, it reminds me of Jimmy Butler. Like that's the type of player that he reminds me of in certain moments. And oh, by the way, he's hitting shots that Jimmy Butler has struggled to hit his entire career when we throw in how efficient of a catch and shoot guy he's been from 3-point range. Like I know he's not the most traditional do-it-all wing prospect that I think everybody would love for him to be. Does he need to be that guy, though, because he's so good at what he knows how to do?
I don't think, and you're talking to someone who scouted Jimmy at Portsmouth, and nobody in the room there thought he was a first-round pick. And that guy scratched and clawed his way into the first round. He was MVP down there. Buzz Williams was going around to telling everybody in any front office who would listen how good this kid was. And none of the draft boards had him in first. I remember Gavoni was down there and a couple other guys, and they were just nodding their head no. And it was an age thing, and that's not AJ's problem. But I don't know. I don't love the Butler comparison 100% because he does. I'm not sure he has that. Jimmy has a different feel inside of him in terms of always being out against the world. AJ,
I'm more along the lines of just in terms of some of the shots that he's able to hit once he gets inside the arc. That's more where my
yeah. Totally. I mentioned Draymond, and I just mean that from a connector perspective and how we can guard. But I get what you're saying, and I like that piece of it because Jimmy did struggle, and he got better at it over time. And AJ does a lot of that stuff naturally. I mean, look at the game that he had against North Carolina. Look at the game that he had at Louisville. I mean, he was 5 for 5 from 3 against Louisville, and he took 13 shots and had 22. And that was a rough game. Like that was a game. It was the third game of a 3-game road stretch where they were at Carolina, at Notre Dame, and then at Louisville, right? Louisville we're not talking about national championship caliber team here, but playing a January game down in Louisville is not an easy task. And he was their best player. And I think that's where he really started to get the trust from his teammates and say, like, this kid can make some big shots. The thing with him is his 3-pointer will always be there, and his range will always be there, which means space.
I would agree with that.
When he gets space, he'll be able to then attack closeouts, and he can attack closeouts 1 or 2 dribbles from that spot and elevate and finish, or make the right play, and kick out or lob or whatever it is. If you're relying on him to be your dribble drive guy, like he's not RJ Barrett, right? At that size, right? RJ's a big kid and could just always get downhill and always at the basket in transition. I think AJ's fantastic in transition. RJ just has more point guard skills. But that's not to say that AJ doesn't handle it well. I don't know if, I just think the mistake people are making on him is trying to define him as, is he a shooting guard? Is he a small forward? Is he this? Is he that? And to me, he is a connector. He is someone who can play in any 5-man lineup that you have, and it's going to be a positive, mainly because he's going to do what he does defensively. You're not going to get out rebounded, and you're always, for the most part, going to get a good shot because he's going to make the right decision off the ball, and that's going to lead to a better decision on the next pass.
So are you confident that we're going to look back probably 2 to 3 years from now, and Aj Griffin's going to be just fine defensively in the NBA, because while there's a good portion of the tape I go back and I watch, and I'm a little frightened with what I see on the defensive end. However, I also go back and I tell myself, Tommy, at the same time, similar to the conversation that I wanted to bring up about 5 to 10 minutes ago, that he lost some of that developmental time. And a big portion of playing defense is not just having the will to play hard and defend, which I certainly think AJ has. I mean, he shows it on the offensive, and I think he has that will to play the game at a high level on the defensive end as well. But it's also, there's a chemistry standpoint to it. There's an understanding of what's going on around you in the sense of working with others. And when he's having to come into a situation at Duke where he wasn't playing high level basketball for a while, now all of a sudden he has to come in and play and really get that cohesiveness down with a different group of teammates and just expect to put it together on the biggest stages at all times. Like, shit, man, if I was thrown into a new situation in terms of like what I do for a living at my day job, and I was expected to get everything perfect within my first year of being at the company, man, like I'd find my ass somewhere out on the street. Like, that's the analogy that I try to use with people when we expect perfection from some of these prospects. So I'm assuming that you're confident. Give him a few years to get adjusted, not only to the NBA level, but with the other teammates is eventually going to have around him, and we'll see better things from him on the defensive side of the ball.
Yeah, I would look at the first game that they played against Kentucky at the Garden, and then compare that to the game that he played against Arkansas or Texas Tech. And even Carolina, like, he didn't shoot it well that game, but I thought defensively he was okay. But I mean, it's night and day.
Yep.
And I mean, he wasn't even ready to be on the floor really in that first game against Kentucky. That was really I think an eye opener for him. But I think, to answer the question, in 2 or 3 years, I think maybe even sooner, only because of the amount of two-man game that he's going to face, he is so big and wide and switchable in any sort of 1-4 situation or 1-3 situation or small. I don't think that he is going to be exploited in any sort of mismatch, unless he's guarding Trae Young, or Curry in
Sure.
some sort of switch. But or the guys who can really stretch it. I just think that he learned a lot this year about team defense. And by the way, it's not like Paolo was a great defender. I think Mark Williams cleaned up a lot from everybody. So
one of my no ceilings brethren last night when we were talking about Duke, Tommy, he's like, for when going back and watching some of that defensive tape, Mark Williams deserves a Purple Heart for some of what he did on the defensive end to clean up everything for everyone.
And hopefully that equates into a top 15 pick, right?
I sure hope so.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think he was so good at that, just cleaning up a lot of the mistakes. But if AJ ends up in Houston, right? I mean, that's not going to be great. If he ends up in Sacramento, even OKC, there are just a lot of young players there, and there's a lot of confusion on, where the future is with these, with who, and so he needs to be in a situation now, a team that's, sort of on the rebound, and can just put him in a situation where he can get paired with some vets and learn from them and grow. Indiana at 6 would be perfect. I even think Detroit wouldn't be terrible. Portland is a mess. That's a very tricky situation.
Well, no, come on, Tommy. Nobody plays defense in Portland. They
got to figure out playing. They got to figure out who's playing there. I think best case scenario for AJ would be, Spurs at 9, Knicks at 11. I just think he's too good to get down there. I could see, the Pacers, being a really nice match for him at 6.
I think there's been a decent amount of Indiana and Portland buzz in the no ceiling circles when we talk about where we would love to mock these guys. So I could see either of those being fits. I could see somebody snagging him a little bit later on. I don't think the New York fit would be bad. The San Antonio fit's a really interesting one, Tommy, because I think it's a good situation. They have a nucleus in the sense of, I think we have an idea of a few of the players that are going to be there for the long term where he can start building chemistry with those guys. But also, man, they just need people who can shoot the basketball, right? I mean, they have San Antonio has a
Right.
number of guys who can drive at the basket and create something once they've gotten themselves downhill with a few dribbles. But they really don't have many guys who are legitimate catch and shoot threats. And if we're going to shout anything as a strength of AJ's, that's exactly what he is. He's immediately off the catch. He's shot ready. He's ready to go up with it. His shot preparation is some of the best in the draft class. So I think the San Antonio fit would be perfect. Are any other fits that come to mind in terms of you would love to see AJ in that situation?
No, I mean, listen, you put him with Murray right away. Murray's a star. Murray's probably the number one most underrated player in the NBA. In fact, that's probably will change here. But he's gone under the radar for a good, 24 months. Vassal's one of those guys that, everybody loved coming out as this 3-and-D guy. I think he's still working his way to figure it out. But if you plug AJ in for Doug McDermott's minutes, McDermott played 20 something minutes a game, started a bunch, maybe that spot right there. I know they have Richardson coming from that Celtics trade, but I think there's a great opportunity for him to come in, right along those lines and just cement himself and solidify himself, with that group. Indiana, as I mentioned before, listen, Washington, post Porzingis trade is an interesting roster. I thought they were really headed in the right direction even before that trade. It's just a very difficult city to play in. But now you're starting to get into the teens, and I just don't see any scenario where he's, he falls further than 11 there where the Knicks are, because, he is represented by CAA. I do know that they loved him, and he's been in their backyard there, at Stepanek for a few years, and I know Allen Houston is very close with, the family and certainly a lot of connections there. And it wouldn't surprise me to see the Knicks move up. We talked about maybe some of the things that they could do. Maybe this is the type of draft where they get aggressive and, maybe go after a Griffin or an Ivy or Keegan Murray. I don't know if Murray's the guy. I just think Murray's a terrific player.
Talk to me about Keegan Murray. Talk to me about what you love about him, because Tommy, I'm telling you, these Big Ten players that everybody is currently trying to sleep on a little bit to an extent. I think Jaden Ivey's, I think at this point, unless you're really that much in love with Shane Sharp, I think a lot of people have him number 4. But Keegan Murray and Johnny Davis, for some reason, people have just dropped those guys down their boards. I, for the life of me, can't figure out why. Everybody in those ceilings, all of us, we can't figure out why. They both rate out highly on our new composite board we just put out this week. Talk to me, especially about Keegan Murray and what you like from him, and why you think he can be a star in the league, because we at No Ceilings would agree with you.
When I evaluate, I tend to lean on my relationships, from the coaching perspective. Fred McCaffrey was at Siena. Iowa, it's a different place. You mentioned the Big Ten. It's a different league. It's just you compete on every possession. There's no airspace. It's not all space pick and roll. You do have to run a lot of horns, and you have to run a lot of floppy stuff and even some flex. He's just a really strong, two-way, skilled kid. It's really as simple as that. He can shoot the three, he can pick pop, he can dunk on you, he can pass, he can post, and he's switchable. I think Jabari Smith is terrific. He's 6'10", 210. I think Holmgren has the ceiling. Anybody who says that he's in Kevin Durant's, stratosphere in terms of ceiling loses credibility for me immediately. And that's nothing personal. That's nothing personal. It's just it's absurd, in my opinion. He's
Who's your
195
favorite
pounds.
out of those top quote unquote three guys that everybody has between Chet, Paolo, and Jabari? Who's like your favorite out of that group?
Jabari.
Okay.
Yeah, again, tremendous skills. Not that Chet doesn't have those skills. There's a lot of mellow in Chet, and not like Syracuse, Denver mellow. Like I feel like there's some, he's mid post a lot. He gets a lot of those touches. I don't know if he's a 5. Melo was like that 3-4, but everybody knew he was a 4 except him. Sort of towards the end of his run there in New York. But I just think again, this is where you end up and who you're paired with. But I just, to me, if you're asking me who's the best player here 10 years from now, I'm not sure really any of them are in the league. It's just one of those drafts for me. I think this is a great shooting guard draft. I think this is a great sort of depth point guard draft. But of those three, I would say Jabari.
Fair enough. That was certainly a great answer in my opinion from Mr. Tommy D, and I would certainly thank him for his time that he got to come on the podcast a little bit, chop it up about Aj Griffin. Certainly makes me feel a little bit better about where I'm at, as I hope he did for all of you listening out there. One more time, Tommy, why don't you plug where everybody can find you on social media, what you're doing with Modern NBA, everything you got going on?
Yeah, I really appreciate the time. This is awesome. At Thomas CD on Twitter and at modern_NBA, modernNBA.com. Just continuing to work on sort of this prototype and this concept that is showing out some real value here. And it's funny because I empathize with programmers and people who are coders and who build things. I've been a part of that world for quite a while now, and bringing a vision to life and actually having people touch it and use it and say, this is great, this is what I'm working on, this actually fits, and helps me make decisions, is so rewarding. And it's related to basketball, which is even cooler. So those folks find me there, and not doing as much content, but happy to be here with you, and I really appreciate the invite. Look forward to doing this again.
No, thank you. The pleasure's all mine for having you come on the podcast, Tommy, and certainly thank you as well to everybody out there listening to this episode of the Draft Deeper podcast. If you haven't already, make sure you are subscribed wherever you get your podcasts. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube. You can follow me on Twitter at Draft Deeper. Make sure you're following No Ceilings on Twitter at No Ceilings NBA, and then you're subscribed to the Substack at NoCeilingsNBA.com if you feel so inclined to not only support us in what we're doing, but also get something out of showing your support, aka a draft guide that's jam-packed with awesome information, 58 players worth. You can not only purchase that draft guide, but also some incredible merchandise at NoCeilingsNBA.BigCartel.com. We appreciate everyone who's shown us some support already, and we cannot wait to see more people posting about our draft guide and some of the insights we've given, and all the support we've received, not just from there, but also on social media over the recent weeks. It's been absolutely incredible to see the outpour. So thank you everyone for supporting myself as well as the No Ceilings platform, and more's coming. We got plenty more written content coming on the Substack. I can promise you a buttload of podcasts coming on this feed. So certainly make sure you're subscribed and you're staying tuned to what I'm doing here over at Draft Deeper. But until then, thank you all for listening, and I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your week.